There's actually a certain discipline when you start talking about technology ideation. And that discipline is first of all, to understand that technology really isn't all that complicated, that we're dominated by four kinds of technology, and that technology serves a specific purpose, which is, remember, technology is to make a better us. That electrical is supposed to mimic the brain and the senses. Mechanical is about if you have things that are in motion. Chemical is reactors. You're all just big bags of dirty salt water. And software is about how we process information. What it comes down to is, in terms of technology ideation, there are four different kinds of ideation where you apply technology to. One is I have a technology, but I have a solution for looking for an answer. And so, if that's the case, then what you want to be looking at is one of these factors, and I'll talk more about it. If have a specific business and I'm interested in the product offering, then I'm either looking at the product, market, or operations. If I have a specific market that I'm interested in, how do I find that market opportunity? And that's that I have to find differentiation, basically something brand new. Look at pain, niches, and gaps. So what is my market of interest? And this is where most people go into. And finally, society. I want to change the world. Well, look at the societal events that are actually going on and what context is actually changing. Legal changes are a good place to look at. Now, in terms of I want to apply a technology, push means that I could put it out there because it's generic. People want it. And an example of that is like a cure to COVID. Pull means that the customer wants it and they're asking for it. For example, home care solutions. For those of you who have elderly parents, it is damn expensive to have somebody watch after them 24 hours a day. You can't afford it. So right now, actually, China has got a big problem with an aging population. It's actually pretty stunning. In 30 years, their average age of their society is going to be 52 years old. I mean, think about the average person. And so they're going to have a lot of people to man these factories and everything else. And so, but they're going to also have to take care of these people. And so they're looking at home care solutions. Japanese are working with robots. I'm somewhat skeptical because, let's face it, if you're an elderly person, you want to spend all your time sitting around talking to a machine. What are the things that are trending, like software as a service? And what type of technology are you talking about? Are you talking about a platform? Are you talking about networks? If there's a specific marketing you're looking at, a gap means that there's nothing there. And how do you find a laggard industry that's not there or something like that? And this is where you have to do research, or a good place to look for gaps or legal changes, because the law prevented anybody from being in that space. Once the law goes away, you can jump in. This was actually the original business model of Enron, which was actually a good market. Niche technologies are out of a larger market, finding a little piece. For example, Airbnb, then sports B&B started happening, which is just housing for specific sporting events. Or differentiation is like you created the light bulb or something like that. You have to think about competitively, what do you want to be? Do you want to be the car? Do you want to be the race? Or do you want to be the driver? Because that determines what kind of market best suits you. Competing and innovating a business. I'm either going after the product, I'm going after the market, or I'm going after its operations, like its supply chain. And capturing the future. Those societal problems that we have right now, like global warming or whatever, you can see what all those are. If you remember, we talked about if you want to find opportunity, go bigger or go smaller in the topic area that you're interested in. Go big or go small. And remember, what makes for a better you? Now, what are the bottlenecks? Things still have to run off of infrastructure. And so energy, bandwidth, speed, Do we have enough of that? And what's the limitation of our information age? Here's the thing that people don't realize. Part of the reason why all this happened in the stack is just because the semiconductor got better. It started using less power. It started having greater power. You can store more information and everything else. And that's what made the cloud possible. It would not have been possible to have a cloud back in 1995. There's just too much information for it to exist back then. But now, because of the greater computing and everything, it became feasible. And that's one thing people don't talk about. So if the semiconductor is the foundation of everything, Moore's law, which says the number of transistors is going to double every year and a half, is coming to an end. And the reason why it's coming to an end, the way semiconductors work, it's a semiconductor, meaning sometimes it'll allow electrons and current to flow, sometimes it won't. And so, in effect, it acts as a switch. And the switch allows you to move around ones and zeros, which is digital logic, which is everything's based on. So when we keep shrinking it, physically what's happening in a transistor is you have two pockets, which are conducting and have carriers that can produce electrons. And when it's turned off, they don't touch. But if you turn it on, then they start to flow. Here's the problem. If it becomes too close, then all of a sudden the barrier keeps going down and down and down. And right now that limit is around 11 nanometers. And they've actually gone below that, but that's not quite right. They kind of play games with saying, we have 7 nanometer technology, but it's not really 7 nanometer technology. But anyway, 14 nanometer factory costs $5 billion. They're still using 22 nanometer because they found out, that's pretty darn good, instead of spending all the money on a new facility. Right now in the semiconductor business, it's dominated by 3 companies, and those are TSMC, Samsung, and Intel. Those are the 3 big boys on the block. They can afford to create these new factories. A lot of other businesses can't. And to give you a feeling for what a nanometer is, 100,000 nanometers is basically the width of a hair. And so when you start talking 7 and 5, and so here's what a transistor actually looks like, and the lattice of silicon looks like this. There's a lot of challenges in making things that small. How do you pattern it? How do you get around the physics of things not leaking? Here's the thing about the semiconductor business. This is where I started my career out in. And way back in 1980s, we were talking about what is going to be the end of the road for silicon. And naturally, the guy who worked in lithography said, when we start tracing lines that small, it's going to be really difficult to get the precision. And then the interconnect guy said, nah, the wires are all going to start blowing up. You're going to have to use novel materials. And then we all came to the conclusion that the biggest factor of what's stopping silicon from moving forward was money. And actually, when you look at all the stuff that Musk is doing in SpaceX, to a large extent, we could have had that many decades earlier. And Musk knows it. But we didn't have the will. We didn't have the will to spend the money. When you look at the money to get us to the moon, we were willing to spend that money. And when you look at the technology they had, your cell phone is 1,000 times more powerful in computing than the computers they had on Apollo 11. They're contenders of new technologies. They're also looking at system design. It's going to take time, though, to find a substitute. The theory of silicon was around for 30 years before they can implement it because they couldn't make a good enough crystal. OLED, those really bright displays you see right now, people were talking about it 25 years ago, and my own boss said, is this a threat to us? Because we were working in flat panel displays. I said, it's a new material. The other problem with OLED is it didn't make a good red color, and it didn't make a good blue color, or green color. I forget. One of those. But you need red, green, blue to cover the entire color spectrum. So pick what you're interested in. Now, this is one of the big myths about startups. Do you have to be, they're always talking about find your passion, find your passion. They took a poll of entrepreneurs and they found out that only 34% of all entrepreneurs said that they were truly passionate about their companies. Do you have to love your company? Yes, you do have to love your company, but you don't have to love your product. Again, the first guy who made the first toilet seat probably wasn't all that thrilled about his product, but he believed in his company and his people. Think about the frameworks that you're going to use. How do you perform better with a better us? And so walk through it, pick the strength. Now here's an example of each of these. I'm interested in the law. And this is where all this conceptual thinking and everything we were doing is going to help you pay off in your ideation. What is the nature of the business of the law? The nature of the law is, first of all, in terms of product, market, operations is the most likely area that you should be looking into because the product of the law and lawyers is well defined. The market that people sell into for the law is well defined. But how it operates, that's not so cut and dried. And what it comes down to is the law is a game. The law is not about justice. It's an elaborate game where the goal is that you hope is that the outcome will be aligned to justice, but it doesn't always happen. And that's why laws need to constantly be changed or we create new laws. But what it comes down to is what is the nature of the legal game? It's about knowledge, it's about evidence, and it's about making an argument, and it's about game theory, anticipating what somebody else will do and what you'll do next. And all of this, when you make the value chain for it, it's about information. Well, I can get a lot more information. And what I can do is, what about AI? Game theory can be simulated. And so by integrating AI into the law, then all of a sudden you give the lawyers a way new big weapon that they can use. And so this differentiates you from all the other law firms. Another example for a market is oncology. That's my market of interest. And so gap niche differentiation. Well, the thing about the cancer business is, what's the first step in it? It's about detection. So here we're going smaller. And so what the nature of oncology is diagnosis, therapy, and recovery. And so those are the areas you need to look at. So ideally, in terms of diagnosis, it's not fun getting a chunk cut out of you and then you have to sit around and wait for it to happen. And not only that, but cancer is all about detecting it early. I had a girlfriend in the late 1980s, and she had leukemia. If she had had leukemia today, she would have had a 90% chance of surviving it. Instead, back in the 1980s, her chance of survival was in the 20th percentile. Subsequently, she didn't make it. But what it comes down to is early warning is such a big thing in cancer. If they get it early, they have a good chance. Steve Jobs did not have to die. Steve Jobs was afraid of being cut open. And because of that fear, and he decided to go with the holistic juices and stuff like that, it ended up killing him. At least if he had the surgery, he probably would have had a pretty decent chance of beating it. So how do they detect cancer? And so you do some research, and what you have found is that, and this was actually my old dog, Boo Boo. Unfortunately, Boo Boo passed away, ironically from cancer. But dogs have been known to smell cancer. And so since we wear so many wearables today, why don't we use gas or contact sensors to monitor our chemistry? And we can use algorithms to figure out, to tell us, hey, you should head to the doctor and get a deeper diagnosis. We can do this for actually a lot of diseases. Technology. What if I have a special technology? For example, There's a certain ceramic that has zero thermal expansion. For those of you who are mechanical engineers, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The big problem is when you match materials, if they don't have good thermal expansion mismatches, and when it heats up, one will expand more than the other, and the stress between the two causes things to fracture or to bend or things like that. And so the ceramic has zero expansion. It will not expand under heat. Well, what can we use this for? So I have this great technology and I don't know what to do with it. And so looking through it, looking at the push, pull, power and transportation are two areas that there's always a need for. And in terms of, so thermal expansion is related to heat. And one of the big things in a lot of systems that produce heat is they tend to be waste heat. And so systems to feed the heat back have CT mismatches. And so you can create systems to do energy harvesting and bring it back. And in context global warming, well, first the question is global warming actually real or not? I did not believe in global warming. I'm one of these people who doesn't believe anything until I research it myself. And I actually went through the models and went through the calculations and have concluded, yeah, we're screwed. But anyway, this belief that mankind can't affect the planet is baloney because the ozone layer, that was the big thing in the 1970s. And people, they said the exact same thing. Oh, if you ban CFCs, people are going to lose jobs and businesses are going to go under, and none of it happened. And it took 30 years because when you have, a big monstrous hole of 1,000 miles above the planet Earth, it's going to take some while to heal. But now they actually have data that the ozone hole is shrinking. And it's all because we got together and did something. The thing is, the past had more polluters. However, that argument doesn't hold up because we never had 8 billion people before. It's solar cycles and all. I've gone through the data. There's no correlation. The amount of heat rise that's happening because of that is maybe like 0.2 of a degree or whatever, and we're seeing a lot more than that. Now, they said, well, maybe the world is heating up and that's why you're seeing more CO2. It works both ways. For example, a lot of people think equilibrium is something very static and nothing's happening. As it turns out, equilibrium is actually very dynamic. What you're creating is being destroyed at exactly the same time, so it balances out. But the cycle is happening over and over and over again. And the thing about, yes, if the world gets hot, then CO2 will lag behind. Here's the thing. When you look at the data, the CO2 level goes up first, and then the world gets hot. And so this is the piece of data I couldn't get around. And we have record heat and cold that we're seeing right now. And this is why everybody's clamoring to get started now. However, self-interest and everything else, who knows? The electric car business, if you were analyzing that, if you want to look at an industry, and we've already talked about that the entire game is all about the battery. And the batteries are a big chunk of the cost. And so we need to figure out a way to get around that. Now, in the absence of waiting for a new battery technology or something else with materials, why don't we get energy from other passive places? And actually, this was a group in my TEM200 class. They were interested in doing this. And so what they came up with is, hey, all these cars have sunshades on it. Why don't we make the sunshades out of solar material? And as it turns out, granted, it doesn't produce a tremendous amount of power, but it'll produce enough that while you're at work, it'll recharge your battery up to 25%. Now, part of you are thinking, 25%, what good is that? Well, let me ask you this question. For a relatively small expense, if you had something that would give you an extra quarter tank of gas while you're sitting at work? Would you want to do it? Anyway, the thing about solar, and these numbers are a little outdated. I haven't updated this in a while. But where is the money going to? And a lot has to do with labor and permits. Solar panels are heavy. They're large and they're heavy. But as it turns out, just driving the panel cost isn't enough. You have to go after the other parts of the cost also. The other thing where solar becomes kind of misleading. Any of you have ever picked up a solar cell? Put your hand over it and look at the energy output, and it'll suddenly just dive, even though just a shade goes over it. And you really only have 4 to 5 peak sun hours in most places. When you start going into the cost when it's subsidized, I was thinking about doing it, and then I found out my payback period was 10 years. For a capital gains project, it can't be over 7, and preferably it should be about 5. So the thing is, they need to get the cost down by half to have widespread opportunity. And so there are opportunities in solar to try to get the costs down. So some quick shot ideas is, for example, renewable energy. You have to have materials like ASU's been working on algae forever, and it's not any closer. And the problem is that it's just hard to get a lot of massive algae, and most of it is water and everything else. On the other hand, there are better materials out there. For example, bamboo is a predatory plant. If you plant something in bamboo, there are pictures of bamboo literally splitting trees apart. It will outgrow anything around it. And so if we can find a way to get the energy out of bamboo, that's a good potential source of energy. Same thing with hemp. The thing is, it's called a weed. It's called a weed for a reason. This stuff grows really easily. Autonomous driving, it's got a long way to go. And the other thing they're underestimating is that driving's fun. Guns. What if we start making better technology to block guns that only a certain person can do it, like RFID? So if you don't have your RFID ring or band or something, your gun's not going to fire. VR, which is the metaverse. I don't know if the metaverse is ever going to make it. I really don't, because it's still too closely tied to gaming. And the thing about cybersecurity is security is always something that has to morph, because the people who hack things will always find around it. And this is why I laugh my ass off about like the driverless car and things like that, because if it's tied to a network, somebody can hack that network. What if people start taking control of like 1 million cars and say, we're holding you for ransom? We're all disabling your cars. Or this implant in a chip. Oh my God, everybody is taking Musk at his word for it. That thing is so far away from reality. First of all, how does your brain interpret the ones and zeros that come out of a digital system? Your brain doesn't run according to that code, so right away you have a problem there. I actually worked in this technology when I was at the University of Michigan, and the way they talk about it is, you people are really naive. But anyway, one thing that they do in cybersecurity is they look at models, and so one model that's often used are cellular models, where you create literally code white blood cells to tackle anything that isn't supposed to be in there. So in terms of context in the future, do you believe the future is going to be Star Trek, where the abundance of technology is spread around and used, and to the point that we can focus more on the stars than being here on Earth? Or do you believe the future is going to be Mad Max, where shortage of supply of materials would cause mankind to start preying on each other? We have so much technology. If you make me the technology czar of the United States, I could wipe out half a government tomorrow. And it's because Think about all the technology we have. Think about the amount of repetition we have in government. We could wipe out a lot of the functions. However, because people run it, it's inefficient. We just don't have the will to use it and the will to solve things. So I'll leave you with a little something to think about. For those of you who choose to pursue companies, what's the difference between a $10 million idea and a $10 billion idea? There is none. It's the same amount of work. So if you're going to go through all that work, do you want 10 million or do you want 10 billion? You are small when you think small. And so, what it comes down to, and I bring it up over and over again, is will. Do you have the will to do it?